And we're thrilled to be joined today by senior officials from across the country who will be sharing their insights on how state, local, and tribal governments, as well as federal agencies, can maximize the potential of this new uniform guidance. And we are excited to be co-hosting today's webinar with our great colleagues at the Data Quality Campaign. Kate, thanks for your years of leadership and friendship and partnership. Really glad we're doing this together today. Please also note, everyone, that earlier today, our Results for America team also released a new guide summarizing OMB's uniform guidance, including recommended implementation actions for federal agencies. I would now like to introduce Jason Miller, the Deputy Director for Management at the White House Office of Management and Budget, where he serves as the federal government's Chief Operating Officer. Jason also leads the development and implementation of the President's Management Agenda as Chair of the President's Management Council. And Jason also previously served as the Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy Director of the National Economic Council during the Biden-Obama administration. Jason, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you, David, and really appreciate everyone spending your minutes on this important topic today. Thank you to the Results for America team for facilitating today's event. As David noted earlier this month, we announced the overhaul to uniform grants guidance. We, in a very unusual step for OMB, we held a big event because we were so excited about it, and 10,000 people participated virtually. We had a packed room here at the White House and thousands of people all around the country, reinforcing how important this is. Last week, the updated version of our uniform grants guidance was published in the Federal Register, and we're hard at work on implementation. This guidance provides the rules how federal agencies manage grants and other types of federal financial systems. In other words, in order to ensure taxpayer dollars are spent properly, we have a set of rules that we use across federal funds. It sounds a bit mundane, a bit in the weeds, but as anyone participating here, the thousands of people that joined for our initial announcement, we believe the uniform grants guidance has a tremendous impact on the effectiveness, efficiency, and impact the outcomes of our federal spending. I've referred to it as the plumbing for our federal financial assistance system, and we all know the importance of plumbing to just making things work. Stepping back, the federal government provides over $1.2 trillion annually in grants and cooperative agreements, which provide funds for research that develops critical medicines, builds bridges that connect us physically, and pays for broadband that connects us virtually, just a few of the examples. These funds also importantly help community-based organizations providing a range of critical services to our most vulnerable neighbors. While these rules for how federal funds are spent can be in the weeds, they also sometimes can create burden without adding value. That kind of red tape increases the cost of running federal programs, and it reduces the amount of money that federal funding recipients can spend on delivering outcomes. In our full top-to-bottom review, our overhaul of this critical guidance document, we were laser focused on burden reduction for recipients because we want our recipients spending dollars on outcomes, not on overhead. So there are many ways that the uniform grants guidance will increase impact. David noted a number of them. Let me just cover a few. Federal grantees such as small community nonprofits can better cover operating costs because in our revised uniform grants guidance, we raised the default indirect cost rate from 10 to 15%, something that we think is important on broadening the potential for additional organizations to apply for federal grants. Companies and any organization that receives funds for infrastructure or other projects now have clear labor standards and increased flexibility in determining the appropriate approaches to procurement. The updated guidance makes clear that local governments and other organizations can spend federal funds to gather data and evaluate the impact of programs. Evaluation is an important priority for us at OMB, for the Biden-Harris administration, and it's a key agency function within our federal government, within our federal agencies. It allows agencies and recipients of federal financial assistance to better understand the extent to which our intended goals are being achieved or not achieved, beyond just performance reporting and grant monitoring, really understanding what works and how do we scale the things that are most impactful. The updated uniform guidance will promote a culture of improved stewardship of federal funds, allowing for more streamlined implementation and providing more effective oversight of federal programs. Let me give you a general example. Oftentimes what we found was that two different agencies were interpreting the grants guidance in two different ways, which meant that a recipient of two different federal programs might have two different approaches to how to comply with the same words inside of our uniform grants guidance. So the more streamlined approach, the plain language approach that we have used, we think will provide more clarity for federal agencies and recipients and ultimately allow better oversight. I'm really excited for all of you to hear from my team here at OMB, and just a huge thank you again to Results for America for facilitating today's conversation. So thank you for what all of you do, and I'll turn it to Nicole. Nicole, over to you.
Thank you, Jason. We appreciate you grounding today's conversation and sharing your vision for the potential this guidance will have when well implemented. To continue the conversation, we are fortunate to have with us three amazing leaders and experts to share their insights. Deidre Harrison is the Deputy Controller of the Office of Federal Financial Management in the White House Office of Management and Budget, and the co-chair of the Council on Federal Financial Assistance, which is responsible for overseeing the implementation of the Uniform Guidance 2024 revisions. Deidre is a senior member of the OMB management team responsible for overseeing the Office of Federal Financial Management, OFFM, its diverse portfolio. And prior to joining OFFM, she was a senior budget examiner in the Treasury branch at OMB, where her portfolio included a number of the Department of Treasury's bureaus and offices and branch-wide financial management policy areas. Loren Schulman is the Associate Director for Performance and Personnel Management at OMB. She joined OMB from the Partnership for Public Service, where she served as Vice President of Research, Evaluation, and Modernizing Government, and oversaw the leadership capacity building and policy solutions to build better government and stronger democracy. She began her career in public service as a Presidential Management Fellow and spent a decade in senior staff positions at the Department of Defense and the National Security Council. Denise Ross is the Deputy U.S. CTO for Tech Capacity in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. In her 20-plus years of doing tech and data in public interest, Denise has worked on a range of issues, including equitable disaster recovery, police accountability, and climate resilience. In her current White House role, she leads the U.S. Tech Policy Network to build open lines of communication around tech and data policy between all levels of government. Denise served in the IT department in Mayor Landrieu's administration, where the city of New Orleans was on the receiving end of many federal grants related to the recovery from Hurricane Katrina. Welcome, and thank you to the three of you for being here. Before we jump in, I just want to note for our participants that audience questions are welcome. Please put them in the Q&A, and we will try to incorporate them into the conversation. Those questions we don't get to, we will follow up directly after the webinar. So, Deidre, I'm going to start with a question for you. I think this is a question many of our attendees have in mind. What is this question? What does this guidance impact for state and localities, and why does it matter?
Thanks, Nicole. Before I get there, I want to say a very big thank you to our co-sponsors and to my fellow panelists today. But probably most importantly, a big thank you to everyone prioritizing being here. There are a lot of changes in the guidance document, and we have heard overwhelmingly from folks that there is a huge amount of interest to really understand and get it right. And so coming to conversations like this one and the many others that'll be happening throughout the weeks and months to come is a really important part of that. So thank you for prioritizing this hour. To that end, back to your question, Nicole, there are a lot of impacts that states and localities are going to feel from this update. Whether or not you receive a grant or a direct payment or really any type of federal financial assistance, this guidance sets the rules for how you're going to get that financial assistance. Now, truth be told, every program, when it is created, has an underlying statute that allows it to perform. And as part of that, there are some cases where specific rules for a program may require a deviation, but those should be exceptions and not the rule. So while Jason calls it the plumbing, I like to call our uniform grants guidance the least common denominator. If you don't know how or what you should be doing at a specific moment, the uniform grants guidance should be the place you are going. It shouldn't be that if you have a question, there isn't an answer that is in that guidance document, although you will then sometimes need to confirm with a program that they are not having to apply a particular deviation. A lot of what we are going to cover this hour is focused on data evaluation. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to highlight some of the other big changes that hopefully will reduce some of that recipient burden, because it really was a key component to this overhaul. In particular, we reviewed every single threshold and trigger in the guidance document, and wherever we were able, we made an update. Now, there are some that are set by law and we were unable to impact or change, but many of them, nearly all of them, overwent some kind of overhaul in this rewrite. So we increased the indirect cost rate, which is a big deal for many small localities who do not have the time or ability to come in and negotiate with us, from 10 to 15%. We also looked at the uniform single audit requirement, where many recipients were right on that threshold between $750,000 and being required to undergo a single audit. Now, after October 1st, you won't have to do a single audit unless you're receiving more than $1 million. Another one that we've gotten a lot of feedback from, and we are particularly excited about for our smaller recipients, are the prior approvals. Oftentimes, recipients have to provide a budget, but then if there are small changes to the things you are budgeting for, you would have to go and get a prior approval before you could make those changes. We went through all of those prior approvals and removed almost a dozen of them, so that way you can more seamlessly make changes that are important while still balancing the need for reporting back to your agency. Another important one is making sure that agencies are meeting recipients where they're at. So they are either simplifying their NOFOs, so that their notices of funding opportunities, so that way all recipients can read and understand whether or not they're eligible, but also making it possible for agencies to use languages other than English when they're conducting their work. So if their recipients don't have English as a first language, they can use documents that are in their language of choice. And the last thing I want to highlight is something that's not actually explicitly in the guidance document itself, but the thing that I think is going to actually change the game the most, which is we, as a federal government, across all 50 plus agencies and the thousands of programs that those agencies administer, are committed to working together with each other to deliver in a more consistent way. Nicole mentioned the COFA, the Council on Federal Financial Assistance. For the first time, we are bringing together senior leadership at all of the agencies that provide financial assistance to make sure that when we get questions asked of us, we are answering it in a consistent way. That implementation as one government should be felt by recipients everywhere. If you are receiving funding from more than one agency, you should be getting a consistent approach, and we are working hard on making that happen. Back to you, Nicole.
Thanks, Deidre. And I just will emphasize, if anyone is excited to hear more about what Deidre just went through, that's going to be the emphasis of our May 15th webinar. So we will drop the link to register for that at the end of this webinar. Deidre, you answered this a bit with your last statement, but in 2013, OMB provided uniform guidance, pulling together information from 8 existing OMB circulars. This really was the first attempt. Can you just say a little bit more about what's different about this guidance and really what's different about this implementation process? I think you started to hit on that.
Absolutely. So the work done in 2013 was really to get ourselves organized. It was the foundation of having one place to go rather than for a particular issue, go find the appropriate circular, or what we here in the federal government call memos, and then a dozen documents later, you could piece it together for yourself. So that work was foundational and critical. We couldn't be here today without it. In 2020, we looked at that guidance, but ended up taking a very targeted approach and only being able to make a small number of fixes that were absolutely required. I had been hearing loud and clear, as Jason mentioned, that there were lots of parts of the guidance where agencies were interpreting it differently, not because of those underlying statute differences, but because really smart people were reading the guidance in a vacuum and making a determination that was slightly different than somebody else. And so when we approached this rewrite, that was what we wanted to change. We wanted to make sure that we were creating a document that first and foremost didn't require a lawyer to interpret. I'm not one. I shouldn't need to have to be one to understand the guidance document. But more importantly, that we were creating a process and an expectation where as a federal government, we are delivering federal financial assistance as much as possible in the same way, instead of each individual program kind of leading their own path and coming up with their own decisions. So it can certainly be the case that a particular program needs to take a slightly different tack because of a particular law, but that should be the exception and not the rule. And because of that, we believe this guidance document is now more clear, it is more accessible, and it is also more understandable, because at the end of the day, if recipients want to comply, they need to be able to understand what we are asking of them. And we believe that this guidance document does that.
Okay, thank you. Well, now let's dig a little bit deeper into the data and evidence pieces. Loren and Denise, I would love to hear from both of you, your perspectives on how this guidance makes a difference for grantees, including specifics to help grantees invest in data systems, technology, analysis, and learning. So Loren, I'll start with you. Oh, I'm sorry, Loren, I think you're still on mute.
Okay, and that was my fault, everyone. I missed sound check, which shows you never actually showed. You have to show up on time. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for having us here. So just to build on Deidre's incredible points in terms of what this guidance does, too often we in government are perceived as just setting out requirements of like, here's the things that you have to do. And don't get me wrong, there's still things that you have to do associated with financial assistance. But here, what is intended when we looked at data evaluation and learning in this new guidance is to make it much clearer, make it more about clarity and permission. Here's what you can do. Here's what's possible. Listening, learning, measuring, and evaluating, those are absolutely things that we would expect to be embedded in your work where that is appropriate for what you are trying to do. And we try to be as explicit as we could in saying, like, this is what is possible, and please feel like you can spend federal grants dollars on these things in order to deliver the kind of programming that you need. And that includes anything from engaging communities so that you can hear from those up front as you are designing programs, to spending a portion of funding around measurements, around data and evaluation activities, and we mean that broadly. And it's defined in the guidance, but it can include anything from direct and indirect costs, evidence reviews, evaluation planning, dashboards, infrastructure, feasibility assessments, actually doing the evaluations and sharing the results. And the personnel and the materials costs go with that. And to reiterate on that, the point being, it was intended, and we don't always say it clearly, but these are the things that are going to make the work that we do in delivering financial assistance good. We want this to be a learning system. The new guidance clarifies, here's what we think is possible to do, and we hope that you take advantage. But I'd love to hear from Denise on her thoughts too.
Denise?
Thanks, Loren. So I just wanted to drill in a little bit to what a local example of this might be. And I like to use a hypothetical around electric buses. So let's say a public transit agency wants to apply for a federal grant for 20 electric buses. With this new clarification onto CFR, maybe instead they decide to take the money that would have gone to that 20th bus and invest it in technical and data infrastructure. So what might that look like? They could use some of those funds to install GPS in each of the buses. And that way you can track where the buses go and integrate that location data with other data, for example, on how many people they pick up at each bus stop. Those data would be essential for that learning that Loren's talking about, for evaluating whether you're meeting the needs of the most underserved communities, or if you need to, adjust your routes or the timing between buses and whatnot. And with that real-time geographic data, you can also set up an API so that riders can see the bus when it's coming on their phones. And that makes their experience more predictable and can help get them to work or school on time. You might also use the funds from that 20th bus to invest in an asset management system that tracks which parts of the buses have been replaced, when it's time for routine maintenance. And that way, those new buses spend more time doing their jobs on the road and less time in the shop for unplanned maintenance and repairs. So by carving out funds for tech data and learning and evaluation infrastructure, you can better serve your constituents and deliver on the goals of the federal program.
That's great. I really appreciate that example. Loren, maybe can you go a little deeper into some of the areas where the guidance makes it easier for grantees to invest in data infrastructure, like integrated data systems and overall capacity to analyze and use data, to either both tech tools and people power to get the job done?
Absolutely. So I first want to step back for a second and then dive into the question that you gave. So stepping back and remembering, why do we care about this? Because yes, at the policy level, absolutely. There's federal policy around the Evidence Act and so much more. It has made clear that evaluation and learning and data is an important priority and is critical to our government functions. But the reason we wanted to make this as open and clear as possible for the grantees is to have everyone who is part of this community be able to better understand if and how their programs are working as intended, and for whom and under what circumstances. We want states and localities to feel that they have the freedom and tools to measure progress, to learn from their grant funder work, and to get better over time. And there are so many ways to engage on that question. And we want people to feel open to your point, invest in the personnel, the infrastructure costs, and the pieces that may go into an overarching system to help you understand that progress, to learn from constituents, to recognize whether or not things are working or where you need to tweak and move on. That can include investing in data to make clear that governments can invest funds in gathering and using data to improve the impact of programs. And by their nature, investments in integrated data systems, which this guidance notes is very much permissible, allow states and local governments to take a holistic and jurisdiction-wide approach, a view of their constituents. It also helps us be able to share with one another. In addition to that, the investment in evaluation, where we want grantees to feel as though they can research the impact of programs that are important to states and local governments, and to understand what impact is this having over time, what might we do differently in the future, and how can we share that with friends and colleagues across the country who are doing similar work. Explicitly list off evaluation and different ways to approach evaluation as an allowable use of funds.
That's really helpful. Thank you. All of this is in efforts to improve outcomes. So really appreciate that perspective. Deidre, going back to you for a minute, what do these changes mean in practice? Can grantees act on it right away? Do they have to wait for specific guidance from agencies? What is this going to look like over the next couple of months?
Sure. So for all awards issued on or after October 1st, 2024, so in just a couple months from now, our expectation is that agencies will have done all of the work they need to do to implement all of the changes on their end. That being said, remember what I said at the top, which is much of what we were doing was clarifying and not changing. We weren't actually changing the underlying policy from X to Y. We were saying, in case there's any misunderstanding, this is what we've always meant along the way. So you don't have to wait until October 1st to be asking the questions of your program staff if you want to be making a change that you now realize you're eligible for. It may be the case that in some circumstances, an update to terms or conditions or any of those legal documents that we all know that we have to follow may be required, but a lot of the changes throughout this document was really about clarifying existing policy, not making new policy. So I would say don't wait. There's no need to wait till October 1st for much of this. Instead, just be asking questions sooner rather than later, especially when it comes to programs that are about to implement in the next couple of months, because there isn't anything really magic about that October 1st number, as much as if your terms or conditions or something specific in your requirements require a change, that may not happen until after October 1st. So unfortunately, Nicole, the answer is it depends, but don't wait, is my advice to any of you out there listening.
Great. And Deidre, we have a related question in the chat, if you don't mind me just reading this. It says, does the new guidance related to data and evaluation apply to all federal grants, including existing grants and future grants, or is it limited to certain grant status?
Right. So much of the updates in this area in particular have been clarifications of existing policy, right? So it has not actually been a fundamental change or some new allowance. There may be some limited exceptions where that is true, but I would say first and foremost, for all awards issued on or after October 1st, the expectation is this will be the governing set of rules. But for many, if not all awards today, there are some portions of the current guidance updates that are eligible now, because again, much of this are about clarifying the existing policy rather than making a fundamental change.
Great, thank you. Denise, going back to you, what is your top line message to states and localities that are striving to build and maintain or expand the systems and capacity related to data, technology, and evaluation? What would your message be to them in thinking about this guidance?
My number one recommendation is to have your tech, data, and evaluation leaders at the table when you're designing your federally funded initiatives. Next up in this webinar, Josh and Yvonne from Indiana and King County, respectively, are two fantastic examples of the types of people you'd want at your table. So find your Joshes and Yvonnes.
Great, thank you. Loren, same question. What would be your top line message to states and localities looking to leverage this guidance?
So building on the points we've made about how this guidance is clarifying and reflecting a better way to explain what has always been possible. Use this as an opportunity to go back to conversations where the answer previously was no, to say, actually, let's explore this. The answer might be yes. Be curious, allow your curiosity to reopen up some of those closed doors that have previously said, I'm not sure that we can use the funds for this, or I'm not sure this is possible, to say, actually, I've heard more. There's an opportunity here. Let's utilize this opportunity to see if we can do this work a little differently, if we can use this as an opportunity to learn, to be curious, to understand, and to get better and make better use of our federal grant dollars for all of our constituents around the country. So I would say, to sum up there, be curious and open up doors again.
Great, thanks, Loren. Denise, or I would open this to Loren too, but can you share an example from your work about how these investments can improve outcomes for residents served by federal grants?
Absolutely. I want to go back to my time in City Hall in New Orleans when I was Director of Enterprise Information. It was 5 years after Katrina, and some $120 billion had come into the region for recovery. But in City Hall, from a tech and data perspective, we were no better off than before the storm. We had a hard drive called the X drive that had 330,000 files on it, but I couldn't give you a map of where the city's parks were, where the lead pipes were that the water pipes that needed to be replaced, where our streetlights were, or bus stops. So although there'd been lots of activity through these federal grants, creating these data sets, they were for specific one-off projects. And there had been little investment in the foundational technology and data infrastructure, and almost no eye toward evaluating what works and what can be improved. So fast forwarding to today, what a game changer these clarifications to 2 CFR are. It puts local governments in a strong position to make smart investments in tech data and evaluation that will ultimately allow you to more effectively and equitably serve your constituents.
A great example. Thank you, Denise. Deidre, what would you say, we've just got a couple minutes here to wrap up. What would you say you really want the federal agency leaders on the call and the state and localities, what would be your top messages for them to take away today?
Thanks, Nicole. It's so hard to have one top line. There are so many things that I could say, but if you've heard nothing else, it would be please keep communicating with each other and with us. So for a really long time, the federal government hasn't done a great job communicating across agencies about how we are implementing federal financial assistance, but we're working on that. This process over the last year and a few months was really all about hearing from all of you externally about what's working and not working. And we heard from thousands and thousands of you about comments about where we could change and how we can make it easier. And I want you to keep doing that. Keep sharing with your federal agencies about what's working, but also what's not working. And last but not least, I'm sure we've gotten something wrong. I don't know what it is. I'm sure there's something we will need to tweak or change because we've inadvertently made it harder. Do not hesitate to let us know. We here at OMB want to be responsive and we want to be helpful, but if we don't hear from you all, we can't make those changes. So please keep participating in events like this and in others and let us know both what we got right, but also what we got wrong.
Well, thank you. We weren't able to get to many of the audience questions, but we will follow up with each of those questions. So thank you for sharing them. Thank you, Deidre, Loren, and Denise, for this great conversation. There will be more to come, but we need to move to our next panel. So thank you so much. I'd now like to introduce our partner at Data Quality Campaign, Vice President for Federal Policy, Kate Trumbull. Kate, I will turn the time to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, and thank you to the entire RFA team. DQC is really excited to be partnering with you today on this important topic. Thank you as well to our White House experts. That was an illuminating first panel and more information than often you get in a webinar. So thank you all. We really appreciate that setup. Now, I want to turn us to a next conversation with state and local leaders and understanding how grantees can leverage the recent changes and clarifications from the guidance to better deliver outcomes for residents. I am joined by two wonderful panelists. The first, Dr. Yvonne Humane-Roberts, who is Chief of Performance Measurement and Evaluation of Washington State's King County. She's the Department of Community and Human Services. Over the past several years, Yvonne has been instrumental in PME's growth from a handful of people to a group of over 40 evaluators, data scientists, engineers, and analysts. With a PhD in clinical psychology, Yvonne brings a wealth of expertise in research and evaluation within community services with a strong focus on equitable impact. Welcome, Yvonne. Our second panelist is Josh Martin, who is Indiana's Chief Data Officer and Executive Director of the Indiana Management Performance Hub. There at the Management Performance Hub, Josh leads a team of talented analysts who tackle complex management and policy issues. By developing targeted analytics solutions, they empower decision makers and drive positive outcomes from across diverse state initiatives. Driven by a belief in the power of data to transform governance, Josh actively promotes collaboration and knowledge sharing. Welcome, Josh. Okay, we have not a lot of time and so many things to dive into. So I'm going to start with a pretty broad question to both of you. But Yvonne, why don't you take the first answer? So why don't you tell us, please, about an important project King County and Indiana are doing or you've been able to do that leveraged federal grant funds to invest in integrated data systems to support performance management, evaluation, or technology systems. And as you answer that, if you could sort of touch on how that investment has improved either King County or Indiana's ability to better deliver services for its residents.
Sure. Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I really appreciate the updated guidance from OMB and its focus on supporting evaluation, data, and community engagement. And I'm honored to be a part of this conversation. For those of you who don't know much about Seattle and King County, I want to first share a little bit about where I live. King County is home to 2.2 million people. We have over 2,100 square miles of land that includes Seattle, Bellevue, Kent, Kirkland, and other cities, as well as large rural and unincorporated areas. We are also home to some of the most diverse zip codes and school districts in the United States. Our Department of Community and Human Services has a biannual budget of over $2 billion, the majority of which that goes back into the community. We manage a range of programs and services to help our county's most vulnerable residents while working to strengthen our communities. As Kate shared, I lead the department's performance measurement and evaluation unit. My team is charged with leading program performance measurement and evaluation work for the department. We are supported by over a dozen funding sources, including federal funds, and our dedicated levy funds that you may be familiar with, such as the Best Starts for Kids levy and the Healthier Housing levy. Our department was a major recipient of federal pandemic relief funding. One project we were able to leverage federal funds along with state and local dollars to invest in evaluation and data systems was our eviction prevention and rent assistance program. We call it EPRAP. We really love our acronyms here at the county. EPRAP began in 2020 at the start of the pandemic, and the goals of the project were to prevent evictions and to provide direct assistance to very low income households. In this work, King County focused on equity for groups of people who historically have not been provided equitable access to rent assistance and those disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. Over the course of the 3-year program, EPRAP reached more than 40,000 people, distributed $390 million around the region, and addressed racial inequities in housing access, with 74% of recipient households headed by a person of color. In terms of investment and evaluation, we used federal dollars along with other state and local fund sources to support from our department leadership to build our internal capacity and infrastructure, number one. COVID response dollars helped to fund evaluation staff who were brought onto our team to lead this work. We also used federal funds to support data systems, including our Grant Care EPRAP data system and the acquisition of an address change database that helped us build our housing stability metrics. In thinking about how this helped deliver better services and outcomes for our community, I'd share a few things. For the EPRAP program itself, we prioritized having data early on, which allowed the county to make data-informed decisions as the program evolved. Members of my team set up the first iteration of the EPRAP data system. Not only did that system provide us with some important data, we leveraged what we learned in developing the data system to help inform our Grant Care data system. The system not only led to good data use, but also allowed tenants, landlords, and agencies participating in the program to enter directly into it, which then could be reviewed and approved by county staff pretty quickly, and that allowed for expedited payments directly to providers. Having a dedicated evaluator on staff allowed us to complete a process evaluation, which provided lots of lessons learned about how we collaborate with providers, which led in turn to many process improvements. A couple of those included innovative contracting methods, which incentivized serving more tenants, leading to more revenue agencies had access to. Then that allowed them in turn to build out and support other parts of their work. For example, we had some providers invest in infrastructure like mobile units that allowed them to better reach target populations. The process evaluation also led to recommendations around consolidating what was 20 or so programs into a single consistent and comprehensive rental assistance program so tenants knew where to go to get help. I also believe EPRAP is a good example of how to use federal funding to not only answer a specific question or set of questions, but to create something that outlasts and builds upon the initial investment. Now we have really clean data to assist in future evaluation work. This allows us to use our integrated data hub to match and merge our evictions, housing stability, and EPRAP data to explore long-term impacts of rental assistance programs. This would not have been possible without investments in Grant Care that federal funds supported. We are using both what we learned and the data to bring to bear in support of our new Keep King County House program, a rental assistance and eviction prevention program funded by the state. We've also retained the evaluator originally hired using COVID relief dollars to evaluate EPRAP, and he is now leading the team evaluating our Keep King County House program.
Great.
Just a few examples.
Thank you, Yvonne. That's fantastic. What I heard was federal investments in data clarity allowed you to get data in early, use informed data. It meant that you could set up a process that allowed people to apply and engage more directly in services, receive services faster, evaluate your services to understand what worked and change them. It's perfect sort of set the continuous improvement and performance management cycle. So thank you. Josh, I'm going to turn it to you. Can you give us an example from Indiana on how the leveraging federal funds allowed you to invest in your systems and then provide better deliver services to Indiana's residents?
Well, thanks, Kate. It's great to be here with you and to work with Results for America as well on this over the past several years. And a huge thank you to our partners at the federal OMB for making these updates. This is huge. What we've done in Indiana, we started up our management performance efforts under an executive order in 2014. But what we found is we were working with different agencies. It was very complex to try to blend and braid funding from federal programming to help build capacity, as well as navigating all of the different regulatory frameworks. But we were doing it, and then in 2017, we became a codified state agency, which allowed us to focus the way that we created our agency to help better navigate some of the webs of regulations and the like. But we've mainly done a lot of blending and braiding of funding to slowly and incrementally build up our data platform and our data capacity. So like using funding from CMS to create an open data portal for Medicaid data, and then leveraging that again as the open data portal for other state efforts. Of course, during COVID, having the ability to have the platform in place that we have built over the years and the data that we have been bringing together into the integrated data system from all different areas of government allowed us to do the first of its kind study with the Fairbanks School of Public Health to actually do random sampling and find out the population prevalence of COVID, which was a big deal. And from the data work we did on our platform from that, we then had a database data asset that we put together that we could use for our notification of individuals to let them know they were up next to get the vaccine. So we've been blending and braiding funding and pulling it together and trying to navigate it and build this capacity smartly over time. But this clear guidance is going to give us a lot more opportunities to work with our different state partners, because as an internal state agency, we work with the different departments that get funding from different federal partners, whether it be from a Health and Human Services or Department of Labor or Education, as we host the statewide longitudinal data system as part of our integrated data system. That is really going to help us streamline those communications. And I'm going to be out educating my friends on all the new guidance and updates and what opportunities we're going to have to build better for the future.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Maybe I can dive a little bit deeper on where you just ended, which is sort of how do you think this guidance is going to help you as you consider future investments into your management performance hub and King County's integrated data systems and evaluations? How will it make doing that, making those investments easier for you all? Josh?
I think just the clarity in there that really shows that you can use it for these efforts and that it should be used for these efforts. I think traditionally we've had a lot of risk aversion at the state level in terms of making sure we're not going to get an audit finding. So if things weren't very explicit, it was usually a no. Now there's a lot more clear language. It's much more explicit. You can use it. There's better guidelines on how to use it. And as a sub-state recipient being getting grants from our partner agencies, it gives us a lot more clarity, not having a large financial staff to go and do the navigation of all of this, about how we can better leverage funding. I think because in the past, we really left a lot of indirect cost funding on the table because it was just too complex to try to go through the calculations to get there. So we just kind of said, we'll not do that because we don't want to have a finding if we get it wrong. And we're just gonna eat that cost as part of our operational cost. But now there's a lot clearer ways about how we can go about doing that, and there'll be consistency across all of our different state agencies in the way that they're working with their federal programs about how we can leverage the funding.
Great. And Yvonne, for King County, do you see any other ways that this will be helpful to you all?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with Josh that added clarity is really helpful. I think additionally, the ability to use funds for community engagement as it pertains to evaluation and data is one space I see King County using and leveraging federal investments to advance our work is centering equity is one of our core values. We've worked over the past 7 years to expand our data, and along with our partners in public health, Seattle King County have built a strong infrastructure to support our work, including an integrated data hub similar to what Josh has. We're currently working to strengthen the equity foundations of our data integration. We want to increase collaboration and center the experiences of community members whose data is captured in our systems. So we're currently supported by the Actionable Intelligence for Social Policies, Equity and Practice Learning Community. We're developing a community engagement strategy to do this, to help us better understand the opportunities and limitations of using our local integrated data resources for care coordination or service access. And our goal is to engage our community in shared understanding and decision-making, working in partnership to consider perhaps new data sources we might develop or bring on, or questions we might ask. And I think additional resources from the federal government could really help us support this work.
Fantastic. I love the community engagement piece that ties back in my mind to what Denise was talking about in the first panel around buses, right? Sort of thinking about what is it that the community needs you to spend these not extra dollars, but this clarity, how to they hope that you will integrate it all. So I love that example. I'm wondering now, Josh, as you think about your other colleagues that are sitting in other states that are overseeing other integrated data systems, SLDS systems, or at the county level, what advice would you give to them about how to think going forward about enhancing their data, their performance management, their evaluation and technology systems based on the guidance that I know you were reading earlier today?
Well, I think the big thing is to focus on the tools that you need that are generalizable to work across different disparate data systems. So that's really important. And one of the main reasons that we are able to work in the fashion we do is because we have a generalized record linkage model. That's a probabilistic system, so that we can link from numerous disparate systems that have all collected data in different ways over time. So I think that's a key thing. But the biggest thing that kind of came out during COVID is that data literacy is really low globally, and we don't have very good data governance. And it sounds like in King County, you guys have been working on creating some quality data and dealing with some of that legacy data debt. But I think strong data governance and metadata management is a key place to be looking at investing some time and resources and getting yourself a really your system of record for metadata. If you don't know where everything's at, if it's all on the X drive, and you can't search the X drive, which I was in that state not too long ago, but ours was an S drive, then it's really difficult to pull the strings to figure out where to get everything to. So looking at creating a centralized data catalog and leveraging data as an asset and treating it like an asset so that it gets cataloged so that people can find it. And the benefit of doing that with your metadata is then you can tie in who's responsible for it, how do you get in contact with them so you can get access to it. Better yet, what regulations are around it, what can and you can't use for, and what assumptions might you need because of the quality issues in the past. And those are all really powerful things that in the past have taken just months and months of time going back and forth, and usually a lot of lawyers involved to figure out if we can do what we want to do and then how we're going to do it. And then when we actually get the work done, it's like, wow, we spent most of the time just figuring out if we can do it. And the answer was yes from the start. So if we could start from yes, that would be great. But having all of that in a system with the guidelines laid out really opens the opportunity to be able to automate role-based access to data using more modern controls, and then eliminating a lot of this overhead and administrative burden.
Fantastic. Data governance is always the answer. It's at least where you should start, right? And not only for all the things you mentioned, but for these blending and braiding, right? Like if you're going to be looking at this uniform guidance in detail and thinking about some of these clarifications and uses, it's great to have all of the people from all of the various agencies whose money you're blending and braiding at the table, making decisions together.
Absolutely.
Yvonne, I'd love to hear from a county perspective, guidance and advice you might have about this sort of thinking about blending and braiding.
Yeah, thank you. I love the idea of bringing everyone to the table, because one of the things that we have found is blending and braiding funding is so incredibly helpful, but it can be really complicated. So one of the things we've learned over time is how important it is to understand eligible activities and expenditure timelines, because what happens is money comes in at different times and has different rules associated with it and requirements. So there is an administrative burden that's important to plan for and ensure you know when funding will be available and what specifically it can be used for. And so bringing all the people, the different players together, as you were saying, Kate, I think could be really helpful in that. There can also be a tension between spending resources on time, which sometimes can go pretty quickly, the requirements, and engaging community in an equitable way or creating multi-year studies to assess effectiveness of a program. So taking time up front when it's possible to strategize is always helpful. And then also think through, and Josh touched on this as well, what you need internally to build your team, build your infrastructure to harness the data. So some of the things that we've done that people might consider is building a dedicated evaluation budget into funding, create carve-outs for staff professional development, licensing, tools you need, identify gaps that you have, and use the funds to build that support and that infrastructure. And then we've also done a lot to set aside resources to support our community, because we can only answer questions using the data that comes in. So really helping our community all the way from responding to RFPs through data collection, submitting data, and then working in partnership to make sense of that data. All of that takes time and effort and needs to be purposeful. And so building some of that into your time and capacity as well is helpful.
Fantastic. All right, we have just a couple minutes left, and I have one question for both of you to send us off on, which is we've talked about how complicated all of this can be, right? It's wonderful to have the clarification and the guidance, but doing it right is complicated. The first panel talked about lawyers at the federal level. You all have your own lawyers. It's one thing to get the federal agencies clearly on the same page, and then that guidance comes down to all of you. What do you need from the state level or from the local levels from your federal partners to make implementing this guidance, working with your lawyers, smoother, easier at the state and local levels? Yvonne, why don't we go to you, and then we'll finish with Josh.
Sure. I think first, the federal government's leadership and signaling and leading on use of federal funds to support evaluation is so important and welcome, and will bring broader support to state and local government investments in evaluation. So just really excited about this move forward. In terms of specific support, conversations like this one that's been set up today is a great start, and I encourage federal partners to continue to create opportunities for shared learning and advancing the conversation. I know that folks talked about that earlier today, and I love the idea of a learning community, all kind of figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and growing and sharing together as this gets rolled out and moves forward. I think in terms of the grants themselves, as people begin to explore the new guidelines, there will be a lot of questions about what will and will not fall into eligible activities. So continuing to focus on providing clarity, I think is going to make it easier for everyone.
Great.
And then also consider expenditure timelines that allow for more flexibility. Not only will this allow more time to engage community in meaningful and equitable ways, it'll also allow for purposeful planning, ample startup time, and better ability to braid funding so folks can use the most robust evaluation designs available. Finally, I am in a very fortunate position to be in a large county that is really supported by federal, state, local dollars and our elected officials. And so I would encourage purposeful outreach and opportunities to small organizations and those in underserved communities that could benefit from these federal investments in evaluation and data infrastructure.
Great. Thank you very much, Yvonne. Josh, the last word to you. What would you need in terms of support from your federal?
Well, we're nearing the end of our administration, and Governor Holcomb is not eligible for re-election. So we're just trying to get things set up to hand off to the incoming administration, so they can actually take this and really leverage it going forward. I think examples, gold level examples of this is an example, a detailed example about how you can do this. I think that can be helpful, and just them getting on the same page at the federal level will be helpful. And those programs being consistent in the way that they're managing with the program level folks here at the state. Anytime you want to create a guidebook, a how-to guide, a show me, or really having a helpline. Like if we can, make a call in, phone a friend and say, hey, this is what we're thinking. Here's how we're kind of trying to play it out. Do you think this works? If not, can you make a suggestion that we can maybe move it on? Or is there a better way for us to think about leveraging federal funding rather than what we're planning?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both so much for your willingness to share your years of expertise and knowledge in this area with everyone on the webinar. We didn't get to the questions in the chat, but I know there are a number and we will respond to them after the fact directly. And with that, I will hand it back to Nicole.
Thanks, Kate. And thank you, Yvonne and Josh. Those were helpful examples and reflections. And many thanks again to Jason Miller and our earlier panelists, Deidre, Loren, and Denise. And all of you who took time to join, those of you in the field doing this hard work to drive important outcomes at all levels of government. So please check out the chat. There's a new resource from RFA. This guide lays out top takeaways and updated from the updated Uniform Grants Guidance and recommends specific steps federal agencies can take to support effective implementation, particularly in the areas of data and evaluation, simplification, community engagement, and customer service. And of course, please join us again on May 15th to talk about how the new Uniform Grant Guidance is simplifying the grant process. So the link to register is in the chat. And finally, I dropped in my email. If there were questions you weren't able to ask, please feel free to reach out anytime. So thank you again to everyone, and we hope to see you again in May.